dernière conférence de la journée qui va nous être présentée par Pedro sous le titre de Oralité et Écologie en Marc 4, 3 à 9. Ça sera en anglais. À vous la parole, Pedro.
So good afternoon. So Orality and Ecology in Mark 4, 3 to 9. To communicate the message concerning the kingdom of the Father, Jesus successfully made use of imagery taken from the natural world to tell his audience that there is a similarity between the divine work of the kingdom and that of the process of nature, that God is active in both. This truth may even be clear today, but it does not automatically draw the faithful to respect, love, and preserve nature. Biblical texts are studied from various points of view, aiming at uncovering their message for life in the current global crisis. However, I realize that little has been done on how to transmit persuasively the message of the biblical text on the care of creation. To fill this gap, I deem it necessary to deepen the rhetoricalness, that is, the persuasive strategies embedded in Mark 4, 3 to 9, by looking at the orality and the ecological elements in the text. Then I try to see from the African context, from the Makua tribe rhetoric, that is my tribe from Mozambique, some persuasive strategies that could render the message on the ecology persuasive to today's Makua audience. I take Mark 4, 1 to 9 as an echo parable that employs elements from nature in a persuasive manner, which, if combined with African strategies of persuasion, could lead Makua audiences and others to feel persuaded to adopt an eco-friendly life that is imbued with an ecological sensitivity. In my view, deepening God's message on ecology from biblical texts has to go hand in hand with discovering the means for its persuasive transmission. I proceed as follows. In the first part, I study the text from the oral point of view with reference to ecological and rhetorical elements embedded in the text. In the second part, I study a Makua oral story related to ecology with reference to its persuading power. And in the third part, the application, I attempt an application of some elements of Makua story to the biblical text for a persuasive transmission of its ecological message. Then the first part, the orality and ecological aspects of the biblical text. I'm aware that orality is a controversial and a broad term, and then I stick to the Latin etymology, os, oris, mouth, and I take it as designating all the dynamics of the word of the mouth. Then I don't take it only limited to the word of the mouth, but I take it in a broad manner that it designates all the dynamics of the word of the mouth, that is, the speaking, the listening, the performance, and the non-verbal communication. Concerning the marks of orality or the features of orality, I adopt Actemaier's definition in his article Omne Verbum Sonat, that verbal clues that by being heard, not seen, would have aided the listener in understanding the organization of the kind of complex writings that are found in the New Testament. And I'm also aware that oral biblical critics are divided on how to categorize the features of orality in a written text. And I adopted the categorization proposed by Wendland, who says, for example, who gives the following examples: recurrent motifs, use of interjection, presence of parataxis, use of mnemonics, the presence of same-sounding words, and emphasis. So, and in this text, concerning the orality of the text, I will point the following features of oral text. Hearing motive. Chapter 4 of Mark's Gospel has been considered by some scholars as characterized by hearing paradigm. This pericope under study begins and ends with a hearing motif, akuete, listen, in verse 3, and then ota, ears, akuein, and akueto in verse 9. It is worth of note that the fact that in Mark's Gospel the verb akuo occurs 44 times, and it is only in our pericope that the imperative akuete, listen, is employed without direct object, because in fact the direct object of the imperative here is supposed to be the whole story, the whole parable, what follows. Another feature of orality that I would like to point out is interjection. Although idu, we found in this text, idu is formally a second person singular aorist imperative of the verb to see, it is used in that way only in a few times in the New Testament. Most of its New Testament occurrences represent idu, the intercession particle, rather than idu, the imperative verb. In communities accustomed to oral communication, these interjection nuances an oral narrative reduced to writing. Interesting also is the fact that it is placed after akuo, to listen. And then this does not mean to see with the eyes, but to calmly imagine. In fact, it is used here to heighten the appeal to listening. Then another feature of orality is the parataxis. In our pericope, except in verses 3 and 9, respectively the opening and closing verses of our pericope, all the other verses are introduced by paratactical kai, kai egeneto, kai elthen, kai katefage, kai alo, kai euthus. Then from the grammatical point of view, the use of kai in our pericope is simply to provide the audience with a plot line connecting events and providing cohesion to the story as a whole. And also it functions in this pericope under study as an oral structuring element in order to appeal to the ear and help the listener join the various events in the parable. Then I would also point out to mnemonics. Kelber says that parables are mnemonically shaped to facilitate speaking and hearing. And then we have mnemonic patterning here as an imprint of orality. As a matter of fact, the parable shows a sharp contrast between triple failure along the path, rocky places, thorny soil, and triple success of the seed, multiplying 30, 60, and 100 times. This contrast renders the story under study orally impressionable for the display of opposites in order to hold the attention of the audience. And then we have also same sounding words. Commenting on reception of ancient texts, Horsley affirms that how a text was received depended not only on what was said, but also on the sounds employed to say it. In our parable, we identify, I would point out the alliteration, that is a repetition of some sounding syllables in the opening of the parable. For example, speron, sperai, or alpha that lengthens the sound in verse 4, ta, Petena, Kai, Katefagen, Hauto, aiming at stressing the unhappy outcome of the first sowing. Then I also identify the repetition of kappa consonant, Kai, Karpon, Uk, Etoken, no? It yielded no fruit in verse 7. These same sounding words here are meant to highlight the words and dissuade the audience from being like the three bad souls. Then we could also look at the ecology in the text, the use of, in this paper, by ecology I mean the words, concepts, ideas, expressions, mindset, worldview related to natural world. Then we have the sower, speiron, we have speirai, hodon, rod, petena, birds, we have petrodes, stony, we have gain, sand, and so on and so forth. These elements are related to humans, to animals, to the universe, and there is no hierarchy among the created elements. This is very important also to note. He or she, the listener, has to stick to the persuasive power of the imagery taken from nature here. The rhetoricalness of the ecological elements does not reside in their grammatical or synthetical role in the parable, but in the imagery which they are intended to display in the mind of the listeners. In fact, parables dealing with natural processes address the listener's feeling for the natural world. And then in the second part, after dealing with the orality and with ecology, I deal with a story, a Makua story from Mozambique, that I would like to read it. The translation I have there, I have made from the Makua. Once upon a time, an old man said to a group of young men, "You young men, be wise. It's not enough to be initiated. Be wise. Fear God and the spirits of our ancestors, and show respect for our rivers and our forests and our mountains and the animals that live on there. And listen to your elders. Corn gets ready to harvest while still attached to the maize plant." This is a proverb. "Allow me to tell you the following story. There was a young man like you many years ago, before your fathers were born. One afternoon, the young man went to bath in a river and got the disease of acne, because the river and all that lived in it hated him. The following day, he went to a mountain to hunt wild rabbits. And when he reached there, it began to rain heavily, and he could not hunt the rabbits, because the mountain and the wild rabbits hated him. Then he went to a forest nearby to fetch some firewood. But when he reached there, the strong whirlwind started to blow, and he could not cut the firewood, because the forest and all the animals hated him. The next day he went to his field to sow peanuts. He saw the peanuts and went back home. But a friend of his came to tell him that all the peanuts had been eaten up by rats and birds, and he did not harvest anything that year, because, you see, his own field, the rats and the birds hated him. Open your ears and be wise, young men. Otherwise, God, the spirits and our ancestors, the waters, animals and plants will be against us all, and we will be swallowed, our roots and our fruits." So this is, in fact, the Makua story. I recorded it from an elder, and then I tried to analyze it. I translated it into English and tried to analyze to see the employment of vocabulary from nature, the rivers, corn, forests, animals, wild rabbits, and so on. And then I realized that these elements from nature employed try to force, in a way, the listener to revisit his experience with nature and possibly embrace an ecological worldview. In revisiting those experiences with nature, he or she is more likely to feel called to relate it harmoniously to it than if those experiences were, for example, with humans. And then we have a use of a proverb in this Makua text, and we have repetitions also of expressions and themes for rhetorical effect. We have, for example, the presence of God and the ancestors in order to give more authority to the message. We have the use of metaphors also from nature. We have the use of non-verbal communication. When I recorded the elder, this is the old man, he used non-verbal communications, he used gestures in order also to heighten the importance of what he was saying. Then some fear-inducing figures, spirits, ancestors that are used here. So all these, then in my paper, I see that there is, it's possible to have a dialogue between Mark 4:3-9 with this Makua story that is also an echo story, I will call it. That took me to re-oralize the text, basing on what I have found in the text of Mark, the oral elements and the elements from nature from Mark, and basing on what I have found from Makua text, its orality and its ecology, or the orality and the ecology of the Makua text, and then I try to re-oralize the Mark 4:3-9 in order to make it more persuasive. What have I done? I inserted attention-grabbing words from Makua context. I inserted into the parable from Mark, and then loudness. I suggest some loudness in some verses that you will see in my paper, and we find, because now I don't have time to display, but I suggest loudness in some parts of the text. I suggest silence. I inserted silence between the third and fourth type of soil in order to help the hearer make a transition between the positive and negative outcome of the seed. I inserted gesture for the expression. For example, anyone who has ears to hear should hear. Now, at the end of the parable. Then a rhetorical translation of the text, especially emphasizing the verses that deal with the nature, the ecological elements. Then I would end with I end my paper with a proposal of what I call eco-rhetorical preaching. Eco-rhetorical preaching. I mean a preaching that, based on a biblical text, uses elements from the natural world in a persuasive manner in order to enhance love and care towards creation. In my view, Mark 4:3-9 is a model for eco-rhetorical preaching today, which appears to me urgent and indispensable in the current ecological crisis, where it seems the appeals made by Pope Francis, theologians, governments, and civil society organizations are not reaching the heart of the people. So perhaps eco-rhetorical preaching could appeal to the ear of the audience. And then I suggest some steps. For example, just I will read it. For example, the first step that could be useful also for biblical apostolate, reading many times the biblical text and identifying the theme, and then considering the second step, considering the rhetoricalness embedded in the oral features of the biblical text, the metaphors, proverbs, repetitions, and then looking at the ecological elements present in the text, as I did, and then finding in the local culture oral strategies of persuasion. Local culture, I mean traditional and also modern or new cultures of today that could help highlight the importance of the ecological message today. And then taking into consideration the above points, one could attempt a persuasive translation of those words, expressions, or verses which are related to the elements in the biblical text. And then finally, one could preach the biblical theme using both the persuasiveness of the biblical text and the local strategies of persuasion. This could be, according to me, adopted by all Christian preachers. I think it would be a very good contribution of Christianity and to these global crisis today. So I think, in fact, my thesis here is that our contribution is not only on concerning what the biblical text says concerning ecology or concerning nature, but on how the biblical text says it. Not only the thing that is said, but how it is said. Anyway, I would have some other things here to underline, but I think this is enough, yeah.
Merci beaucoup, Pedro, pour votre exposé. J'invite votre première lectrice à prendre place pour donner appréciation et évaluation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Father Jose Joaquin Pedro, for your paper, Orality and Ecology in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, verses 3 to 9. The study is interesting. I found it original and mind-seeking and engaging with the thought of the author in order to see how we can relate the gospel text or the scriptural text with our stories and orality. This study has captured the text reading in the context of Mukua people of Mozambique narratology. It has examined the similarities of Makua people of Mozambique natural elements with those natural elements or ecological texts or words that the author has derived from Mark chapter 4, verses 4 to 8. Second, the author has used Pache recommended methodology of contextualization, deconstruction, and reconstruction. Additionally, the author has applied rhetoricalness approach or persuasive strategies embedded in the reading of the text by reading the text between the lines in order to draw out what the author calls eco-rhetoric parable in Mark chapter 4, verses 3 to 9. The author has drawn out Mark 4, 3 to 9, what he terms ecological in the text by drawing out the ecological words: sower, birds, to sow, stony, sand, sun, roots, thorns, and fruits. He has identified repetitions in the text and shown how many times Semitic kai is used in the text. Number 3, the author uses oral transmission to illustrate the orality in the text by pointing out to vocabulary from nature, although ecology is not the main theme in Mark chapter 4, verses 3 to 9, as we would agree that Jesus is using this parable to illustrate a different theme. The author explains that he uses the oral transmission to make the listener revisit his or her experience with nature and embrace ecological worldview. In revisiting those experiences with nature within the text, the author assumes that the reader will be called to harmoniously relate with the experience in the story. In this regard, I find the author trying to bend the text too much in order for him to read the text from ecology and rhetoricness of the text. Fourth, the author analyzes the similarities of the lessons in both the parable, Mark chapter 4, verses 3 to 9, and the Makua people of Mozambique, by which he points out the importance of the elements in both narratives and the lessons they teach by re-oralization of the text. That is a new insight in this study and is a commendation for the insight that the author uses. 5. The author suggests that one of the ways to use eco-rhetorical study of text is for preaching, so that the Bible text or pericope may touch the hearts of the audience, particularly in relationship to what is familiar to the people and within the context of the people, realizing that when you use a particular story of the people, the message becomes more alive and real. And that, I think, is another way that the author is reaching out within this text. The author can promote the study of Scripture and can be used as rightly to say for preaching, as he indicated, that is reconstruction. 7th, the method can enhance, reinforce the use of social media to persuade the audience when preaching. This is a 21st century approach to preaching and can be very effective in preaching. But I think by using the real life story of the people brings the scripture text closer to the hearts of the people. I have a concern about the approach by which the author tries to bend the text in order to fit the methodology in which he has presented. That is rhetorical and persuasive, and maybe the author has, maybe he can further explain to us this bending the text that I found very, very close to the study that he presents. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Sœur Aringo, pour vos observations, pour votre rapport. La parole est à vous, Pedro. Quelle est votre réaction face à ces observations?
In fact, though we cannot isolate theme and means of transmission, of communication of the same theme, we cannot do it because theme goes together with how the means of transmission or the means of communication, what I call here strategies of persuasion, they go together with the theme itself. But I didn't mind so much for my studies. I didn't consider it relevant here, the theme. I know that the theme is the kingdom of God, it's not ecology. But the fact that Jesus uses metaphors from, he chooses to use metaphors from nature. He could have used metaphors from somewhere else. That means he he wants really the listener to revisit it, as I pointed it out, to revisit the experience he or she has with nature. So I don't think I'm forcing the methodology. I'm really saying that we could, in fact, what the steps I propose at the end, I think one can use it for any eco-related text or eco-biblical text. It would be, I think, would be interesting to try it out. It's just an hypothesis, but I will try it out to see. Yeah. But I'm not really forcing the methodology. I think it fits very well. Yeah.
Merci beaucoup, Pedro. Maintenant, la parole est donnée au public. Alors, 1, 2, 3, 4, c'est bon.
Joachim, thank you very much for that very clear exposition. And as you might guess, my question goes to the fact that you clearly used a rhetorical approach, and I saw that you tried to show the rhetorical link between the biblical text from Mark and the Makua culture. I think that was very nicely done. I would like to congratulate you for that. Now, my question would be, beyond the question of the rhetorical approach, the rhetorical things, this is a text in Mark which is being clearly appropriated to teach a religious lesson. Do you find, or could you say a similar thing about the story which you heard from the sage, from the wise man that you interviewed? Are these stories also appropriated for similar reasons? Do they carry a sacral dimension, or does it remain only at the maybe educational parabolic level?
Listening to you and reading the paper, I realized that you interpreted more the Mozambican story than the biblical text in terms of balance and approach. So, what does that mean?
Akotia, vous aviez levé la main ici devant.
Je n'ai pas bien saisi le lien méthodologique que vous faites entre le texte biblique et le récit de mozambicain. Méthodologiquement, je n'ai pas saisi le rapport. Si vous pouvez expliquer un peu. Et puis, deuxièmement, est-ce que il suffit de repérer des éléments de la nature dans un récit biblique ou dans un autre récit pour dire qu'il y a écologie? Merci.
Votre voisin, oui.
Thank you very much, Professor
Pedro.
Pedro. Thank you for your wonderful presentation and highlighting the orality in your chosen text and vis-a-vis your Makua storytelling. I was a kind of thrill, maybe you want to put this question on the footnote. Among all the evangelists, I mean, many of us here, we all know that Mark was a kind of a poor grammarian compared to Luke. All the evangelists, if you read the text, Kai Genito and all that, Luke was not only a good historian, but also a good writer and a physician. I was kind of surprised. Is there any reason why you went to Mark and not to pick Luke? As you had argued earlier, it's not what you say, but how you say it. So among the evangelists, definitely Luke would have always been a good writer and a good storyteller. storyteller. Secondly, in the story, you pointed out the imperative, akuo, akoso, akosoma, the akuete, and that began that verse 3. I'm sure you must have noticed also the chiasm, the chiastic nature of that verse 9. The infinitive there, akuen, and then akueto. I don't know what you had to do with that, the effect, the force of that in terms of story telling. My also distinguished colleagues here have pointed out that apart from this oral, structural narrative, what is the theology of the text? Most commentators and theologians, in fact, and ecologists can see that the parable is not just a parable of the seed, but the parable is often called a parable of the soil. Could also be as a parable of the soil, because the problem wouldn't have just been the seed, but the poor soil. And if I were you, that would have actually been my point of departure in terms of ecology, how we abuse the soil, what we do with the soil, because the seed fell on wrong soil, not just because of the carelessness of the sower. Thank you very much.
Les deux derniers intervenants, professeur Manos et professeur Porberet.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Pedro. Pedro, I commend you for what you have done. He belongs to a movement I in particular and some others have been championing, the intercultural approach to reading biblical texts. Here is a good example, I want to say. My good members of the APECA have not been noticing what elsewhere we are doing called intercultural exegesis of texts. And SNTS and some other organizations are accepting and welcoming Africans who are giving insight into the reading of biblical texts through the intercultural analysis of texts. That's very important. You have done it here, but you don't know the term. You didn't use intercultural, that and that, or hermeneutics. I have the book, Intercultural Hermeneutics, in the Bible of the Bible. Have you seen it? Done by Acton Publishers, Nairobi. Two, I want to draw attention. You couldn't have done this work unless you are far away from Mundele, Albert, and Nkole, and etc., who have just published a book, The Bible and Orality in Africa. And a number of us have made contributions in that work that have been very helpful to deal with this story telling. Oh, you saw it. You are defending myself. I'm glad. In any case, I recommend your work. I would like to have a full text that closely do this, and then give it another reshaping in the cultural analysis. Oh, is it there? Yes. I've not seen it.
Dernier intervenant, professeur Porberet, au fond.
Alors, Pedro, merci bien for your contribution. You started with verse 3. You should have put us in context. He began to teach by the sea. You know, the sea is just next door. Pedro. So the context is the right one. Now, my question is this. It begins with akuete, and at the end it says akuen, akueto. So it is hearing, listening. Well, you know, because we have already discussed a bit at the beginning, at table. Now, the audience is an oral AU audience. It's clear. There is something strange in your text. You have 3 cases where the result is 0. First, you have what? A path. And the result of the sowing is 0. Second, you have a rocky ground. And the result is 0. Third, you have thorns. And the result is 0. Now comes the fourth case, the good soil. And there you have 3 results, 30, 60, and 100. What do you think your writer, Mark, is expecting his oral audience to get from these cases? Thank you.
Merci, Père Béret. Maintenant, Pedro, à vous la parole. Essayez de nous faire une synthèse comme réponse à toutes ces questions et observations. Merci.
Thank you for the observations. Yes, there are similarities between Makua and the Mark text. In fact, in my paper, they are there. I found some similarities, not only in terms of rhetoric and strategies of persuasion, but also the theme. But I realized that the Makua story emphasizes more on the ecological importance, on the ecological theme more than Mark, because in Mark it seems that the natural elements are there, but in a metaphorical effect, most probably. And then concerning the balance between Makua and why the analysis I did of the Makua story is more than Mark's, in a way, because I have mentioned in my paper that in Mark I would highlight only 4 features of rhetoric, and it is a written text, while a Makua text I recorded it. I have more elements. It's recorded. I saw the old man when he was speaking. I could see the gestures. So I think that's the point. That's the imbalance there. But it's not because the Makua is more important. No, it's just because of the context of the material. Something is a written material that I have to try to squeeze out some oral elements from a written text. In other contexts is I have the oral elements there, fresh. And then concerning connection on methodology, the approach is only the oral features. I think you are the one who asked. I mean, I highlighted oral features from Mark and oral features from the Makua. And I said in the beginning that I would just say the orality, the strategies of persuasion, and the ecology, the presence or concentration of natural elements. These both, I was a bit clear in my paper. Only these 2 aspects: the strategies of persuasion and the oral and the natural elements. That's all, yeah? And both. No, but anyway, okay, I get you. That mean I missed the kind that I would have compared both. But in fact, it was not my aim. Yeah, I could deepen that possibility, but I don't consider it really relevant for what I want to arrive at, eco-preaching. Because when I explain what eco-preaching is, then I try to use both Mark's elements and the Makua elements. I don't need to compare and say which is better. Or no, it's a kind of 2 contexts that enrich each other in this case here. It's not kind of valuing what is better. That was not my aim. And then I still have some time for the other questions. There were too many, so I'm not. So is it enough to the occurrence of an element from nature in a text to qualify it as an ecological text? For me, yes. From my perspective, yes. It's just a matter of, I defined ecology in my paper as the ecological text as a text that has ecological elements, concepts, mindset related to nature. Then we can discuss what is the effect of, or what is the aim of the element that is present there. And what's the meaning? That's another discussion. And then poor grammarian is, whether Mark is poor grammarian, I don't know. From my point of view, there are no poor speaker. Anyway, he's a rhetor. Mark also is a rhetor. He's using rhetoric. I don't know whether I can say he's a poor rhetoric. It could be maybe a poor Greek, if you want. From which perspective? I don't know. From which perspective? I have read people saying that Mark is poorer than Luke. Paul is better than Mark. From which perspective? Because we find strategies of persuasion in Mark too. Also in Mark, there are strategies of persuasion. So how can you say is poorer rhetoric than the other one? It's a kind of, anyway, I respect, but I don't, yeah. And then concerning chiasm, I noticed it. I noticed the chiasm there, but from the methodology I chose, I said I would deal only with those 4 elements there. It's a kind of methodology, only for those 4 elements, not others. Otherwise it would be a dissertation, in fact. And then, what is the theology of the text? If it's soil, if it's, I will skip it. Because I began by saying that the theme was not it's not relevant for my paper. It's only the strategies of persuasion. Intercultural exegesis, I think it has been Professor concerning intercultural exegesis, Bible and orality. In fact, I'm humble also. I have an article in that book you are referring to. The context, Acueto, I think, is Professor Paul Beret. I mentioned it, the triple, I said there are 3 soils that they have a negative outcome, and then the second one, the 4th one, that has a positive outcome. And then I said most probably the speaker wanted the listener to concentrate, to pay more attention on the last on the last soil. In fact, there was I detected a feature of orality in the 4th soil that I didn't mention before for the sake of time. There is a feature of orality for the 4th type of soil. Let me revisit here my notes just a moment. For example, the good soil has 10 gain, 10 colon. This the good soil is mentioned with stressed similar endings. I noticed it. Stressed similar endings. 10 gain, 10 colon. While the others, they are not stressed, at least for the voice and the ending. So according to me, the speaker wanted the listener to pay more attention on the last soil.
Merci beaucoup,
Welcome.
Monsieur Pedro. On n'en finira pas, on pourrait même prendre toute la soirée. Je crois qu'il y aurait autant de questions et de réponses. Merci, Sœur Aringo, pour votre apport. Puis je vous prie maintenant de regagner votre place pour céder la place à l'événement qui suit. Et je laisse Moïse l'annoncer. En ce qui me concerne, j'aurai terminé mon travail d'aujourd'hui. Je vous remercie.